Talk a little bit about the research related to climate and climate change that's going on out here.
Yeah, so we've always included climate as an important part of our research out here because, again, the prairies occur in the middle of the continent where the climate is naturally variable. And so interannual variability is very important, and that has a big effect on grassland productivity. So the productivity of the prairie varies tremendously depending on the weather conditions in a particular year, and even on the weather conditions the previous fall and winter, when a lot of the soil water storage builds up for the next growing season. What we have found is that the prairies are both sensitive to climate variability and they're fairly resilient within limits. So because, again, these systems have evolved in areas where climate variability is natural, we see, in a dry year, we'll see really low productivity, but the next year, if we get normal rainfall, the prairie does fairly well again. So that's what we mean by being a fairly resilient system. Having said that, though, we're really concerned about what the impact of longer-term droughts and shifts in the timing of rainfall, which are predicted to be an important part of climate change for this region, what those will mean for not only the productivity of the prairie, but the diversity of plants and the diversity of animals here in the prairie. What I can say from some experiments that we've done, so we've done some experiments on Konza where we have altered the timing of rainfall to more closely mimic one of the climate predictions for the future, which is that we might not see large changes in rainfall here, but we'll see a repackaging of rainfall so that we see longer dry periods between rainfall events and then heavier rainfall when it does happen. And we ran an experiment for a couple of decades with those altered rainfall regimes using these big rainout shelters to simulate future climates. And what we found is that even if you didn't change the amount of rainfall, if you just repackaged it that way, it was as significant as about a 30% reduction in rainfall. In other words, it's like a moderate drought. So from a ranching perspective, I would be concerned because what that would mean is that even if the amount of rainfall doesn't change, but we get this shift to longer dry periods and bigger storms, that rainfall is going to be less effective in terms of supporting the prairie, and it's going to reduce the growth of plants here, which ultimately means reduction in grass production and reduction in forage for cattle, for example. So, I think there are definitely concerns about what future climates will mean for the prairie in terms of its sustainability.
One of the other aspects of climate change that relates to the conversation we're having is wildfires. How much do you worry about that here, and does any of your research relate to that?
Yeah, so all of our burning on Konza all of our treatments are based on doing prescribed fire. And we do our own burning, and we have 55 units scattered across the landscape that vary from tens of acres to hundreds of acres. They're different sizes. And we do controlled burns. So we do them under relatively low wind conditions, higher humidity, so that they are controllable. The problem with climate change and fires in places like tallgrass prairie is that as it gets drier, and as we go through extended periods of low humidity, low rainfall, the tallgrass prairies naturally produce a lot of fuel, which is highly flammable. And if those fuels ignite when they're really dry, when they're under windy conditions, those fires are really hard to control. Another issue is, as we see the increase in woody vegetation, one of the plants that's increasing a lot in this region is eastern red cedar. And eastern red cedar, when it dries out, is highly flammable. And so we see big increases in those trees. And again, as we think about climate change in the future and drought conditions, which is going to lead to potentially a lot of flammable material, when those trees start to burn, those fires are much more intensive and much more difficult to control than grassland fires.